Hi, I'm James Schofield, the creator of this podcast, Behind the Bottom Line. Business isn't really about numbers, it's about people. Behind the Bottom Line is a collection of the funny, sad, and frankly weird events that I've experienced in business, and which I turned into stories for various magazines. In each episode, I tell you a little bit about the real-life background that inspired me, and then I read you the story itself. So let's find out about today's story, Voby the Accidental Guru. Voby the Accidental Guru was written for Business Spotlight in 2012, so the beginning of 2012. And it's about two of my favourite characters, Julie and Paula. We met Julie and Paula in another episode of Behind the Bottom Line earlier, the story Julie and Me. And as I said at the time, when I introduced that story, these two characters are great favourites of mine because they are representative of a lot of girls that I worked with when I was a student. They are very cheeky, very independent, and don't have much respect for authority. And I've always admired these girls. They are very good-hearted, but as I said, they tend to get into trouble because they don't really respect the patriarchy. Anyway, Julie and Paula are on a studio audience on a political discussion show, and the only reason they get onto this part of the studio audience is because Paula's boyfriend is working in the production crew and they need members for the audience. And when they get to the studio and are sitting in their places, the question and the discussion show starts, they quickly get quite bored because the panel is disagreeing pointlessly about nothing important. And so they start playing a game in order to pass the time, a game called Date, Bed, Marry, where you have to think of three characters and then you discuss together which one of them you would be willing to go on a date with, which one you would like to go to bed with, and which one you could imagine getting married to. And the fun part of the game is thinking of unusual combinations. And in this particular discussion, or in this particular case, they choose to discuss with each other Prince Harry, Albert Einstein, and Sherlock Holmes, and who they think would be best to go on a date with, who they think would be best to go to bed with, and who they think would be best to marry. And they can agree to marry Prince Harry, but they are a lot of disagreement about which one would be most fun to go to bed with. And Julie favours Albert Einstein and Paula favours Sherlock Holmes. And at some point, as their discussion continues, a sound operator going past with a microphone accidentally picks up Julie's voice as she says something not relevant to the discussion at all that the politicians are having. But the politician, the whole audience and television audience, as well as the live audience, hear what she says, and the politician thinks that this comment is directed at her. And he says something rude to Julie, and Julie doesn't take kindly to being spoken to rudely, and so she calls the politician out and says that he's a total waste of space and waste of time. And that young people are interested in what he has to say because he doesn't have anything interesting to say. And this argument in front of the live television audience gets a little bit out of hand, and the politician walks off stage. And much to Julie and Paula's surprise, shortly after the show, people start making video clips of this scene with Julie putting the politician in his place, and very, very quickly it goes viral, and she becomes famous. And Julie and Paula always have their eye a little bit on the main chants, and they say, okay, this is interesting. Lots of televisions, stations and newspapers and radio stations are ringing up asking for interviews. Why don't we charge a fee for Julie to appear on these interviews or on these shows? And we can earn a bit of a living for a while. And they're quite successful at this, and Julie quickly becomes called Voby, the voice of Britain's youth. And every time a newspaper or a radio station or a television station wants to have a comment from a young person, they go along to Julie, and Julie and Paula put together nice little sound bitey things that the radio stations and the TV stations and the newspapers love. And so she's doing quite well, and everything's going fine. And then she's invited onto a radio talk show, Radio Underground. And then she gets a call in from a surprise guest who she's not expecting to hear from at all. And everything goes very badly wrong for Julie and Paula. Yeah, but it's don't worry, they have a happy end, but that particular scheme of theirs comes undone. I decided to write about Julie and Paula again because I find them a lot of fun. And what is quite interesting for me reading the story again here in 2020, this story was originally written in 2012, was that back in 2012, those were happy days in many ways before politics seemed to have much impact on everybody's daily life. If this comment that I write in the article, let me just find it. 4 politicians who are busy disagreeing about something pointless. And so back in 2012, I have to admit that's I tended to see politics like that as something where people would disagree about something for no particularly good reason, and it didn't make any difference anyway. Now, of course, post-Brexit, I think I probably see things a little bit differently, and politics has intruded to an enormous extent on everybody's life. And again, another confession, mea culpa, but I can remember for me in the past, one of the most usual reasons for looking at news online was to check football results, and that was about it. So yes, things have changed quite a lot since those happy days, and you could say perhaps I should have been paying more attention to politics back in 2012. I don't know whether that would have made any difference or not. This game in the story is called Date, Bed, Marry. In real life, of course, it's called Date, Screw, Marry. I had to change the name slightly for the article to make it a little bit more acceptable to the readers of Business Spotlight, but it is actually quite a fun game, and if you have a long train journey or car journey with friends, I can strongly recommend it as a way to pass the time quite harmlessly and entertainingly. What's also interesting is back in 2012, the series Sherlock by Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss was very, very popular. And I think probably that's why I chose to include Sherlock in the panoply of characters taking part. So Prince Harry, Albert Einstein, and Sherlock Holmes. And I have to say, maybe it's the performance given by Benedict Cumberbatch, but that's always been a little bit my view of Sherlock Holmes. That Sherlock Holmes in the bedroom probably wouldn't be much fun. He spends all his time talking about things that he would suggest doing or be interested in trying, but actually nothing would actually really happen. So, interesting discussion point there. The Goldfish Man, so the politician that Julie has her argument with, he's really modelled on a collective vision of different conservative politicians. That I have Michael Gove, for example, a lot of Michael Gove in him, David Cameron, and probably most of all a fairly unimportant Conservative MP, Marc Francois, who in my mind's eye now I see as being the Goldfish Man. Now I have to confess, actually back in 2012 I'd never heard of Marc Francois. He's only somebody who managed to crawl his way into the public consciousness by being very noisy about Brexit. And back at that time, I had never heard of him and didn't have any idea what he looked like. But the description of him in the story is very much like what the Marc Francois is like if you have a look at pictures of him on the internet. His reaction, because he's quite devious and tricksy, and finds a way to get his own back on Julie, and that is, I think, very much what conservative politicians are like. If we think of Michael Gove, for example, and his treachery, it's the kind of thing that I could well imagine somebody who has felt themselves to be humiliated by somebody, they would try to get their revenge. This is what the Goldfish Man, as he's called, the politician, this is what he does on Julie. I stole a very old joke and recycled it in the story, but I think that actually reflects a little bit real life. Sometimes the best put downs come when you recycle somebody else's joke. I've heard this particular joke in different forms in lots of occasions, and it's very, very good for putting somebody in their place. So I gave it to Julie and told her to use it, and I think she did it pretty well. I suppose an overall theme that I'm interested in is that of the fickleness of fame attained via social media, and that it can come very quickly and be quite pleasant while it's there, but it goes enormously quickly as well. And that's what happens to Julie, essentially. Julie's parents, one of the things which has always interested me about famous rock stars in particular, so thinking of Elton John, Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, Mick Jagger's parents, they were all very ordinary people, very ordinary, down-to-earth kind of people, and they have these very exotic children, and the contrast. Sometimes if you see photographs of child next to parent, and you think to yourself, goodness, how on earth did that develop? Where did that come from? And that amused me, the idea of Julie's parents being very, very ordinary people who are, when they find out about Julie and how she's become successful, are somewhat horrified. Of course, with Julie and Paula, their success is, as always, is somewhat short-lived. But don't worry, they always come back with more adventures. And in the second series, we'll hear from Julie and Paula again. So you don't have to worry about them. And they're some of my favourite people, so they'll definitely be back. So that's enough introduction. Let's now turn to the story. Voby, the accidental guru. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm telling the truth. My best friend Julie Blossom became guru to the nation by accident, and all because of an argument we had about Sherlock Holmes and Albert Einstein. You see, my boyfriend at that time worked for a TV show, and they needed people for the studio audience. It was a discussion programme, and on stage they had 4 politicians who were busy disagreeing about something pointless. So, after 5 minutes, we stopped listening and quietly started playing our favourite game. Date, bed, marry. Perhaps you know it. You think of 3 famous people, and then each player says which one they would choose for a date, for sex, or for marriage. The fun is finding unlikely combinations and explaining them. Anyway, the politicians were discussing the advantages and disadvantages of some policy or other, and we were doing the same for Prince Harry, Sherlock Holmes, and Albert Einstein. We agreed we'd like to marry Harry, but we couldn't agree about the other 2. Julie whispered that Einstein would be good in bed because with his brain he'd think of interesting things to try, and I said the same was true of Sherlock Holmes. Finally, Julie stood up to go to the ladies, but suddenly she turned to me and said about Sherlock, "Well, I think he's all talk and no action." Just then, a studio assistant with a big microphone was walking by, and the microphone caught Julie's words, so everybody in the studio heard her and thought she meant the politician talking at that moment. His face went red, and he opened and shut his mouth several times, just like a goldfish I had when I was a little girl. "Be quiet and listen," said Goldfish Man. "You might learn something." That was his first mistake. With every camera following her, Julie marched down to the front, grabbed another microphone, and turned on him. "Why don't you be quiet for a change? Young people today are sick and tired of fat cat politicians like you talking all the time instead of doing something." Goldfish Man lost his temper and made his second mistake. "Do you know who I am?" he shouted. Julie looked at the audience. "Excuse me," she said sweetly. "Does anybody know this gentleman? He seems to have forgotten his name." The audience nearly fell off their chairs laughing, and Goldfish Man was so angry that he walked out of the studio. We were a bit worried, but after the show we had a drink with the producer and he said it was great television. Early next morning, my boyfriend phoned. 5 minutes after the show, somebody had put a clip of Julie and Goldfish Man on YouTube. The link was tweeted and retweeted, and very soon half the country had seen it. Then her phone started ringing non-stop. "Hi, Terry from Radio Underground. Is that Julie Blossom?" "Good morning. Sarah Tyler from Sky TV. We'd like to—" "I'm calling from the Times. We're planning to write an article. Julie Blossom, the voice of Britain's youth." "Julie," I said, "you need me as your agent. Somebody to charge a lot of money when the press wants to talk to you." "All right, Paula," she answered. "Let's start with MTV." We had a wonderful 6 months. We set up Facebook, Instagram and Twitter accounts for her called Voby, the voice of Britain's youth. When the media wanted to know what young people thought about something, they paid to interview Julie, and we created special sound bites for each show or magazine. My favourite was for a cookery magazine, when Julie said, "Young people don't want to live the dream, they want to eat it and have a second helping." Julie reached her popularity peak when the Prime Minister invited her to Downing Street to discuss youth unemployment. Of course, he just wanted to attract young voters, but the newspapers all described Julie as the nation's guru. But one day, everything ended as fast as it began. Julie was invited onto Radio Underground to do a phone-in show. Everything was fine until the DJ said, "Voby, I read that you had a difficult childhood. Would you tell us more?" Actually, Julie's mum and dad are lovely people. Mr. Blossom used to run a small business in the south of London until he retired and they went to live in Malaga. But to make her interviews more interesting for the public, Julie had invented a more colourful past for herself. So when the DJ asked this question, Julie talked about her father in prison and her mother selling drugs, thinking her parents were far away in Spain playing golf or sunbathing. "I see," said the DJ. "Well, Voby, we have a caller for you." It was Julie's mum. She was furious. "Julie Blossom," she said, "when I get my hands on you, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap for telling those dirty lies." "Mum," squeaked Julie, "I'm working." "No more nonsense, my girl. I want you to tell the truth about us right now." So Julie did. And she had to promise never to tell lies again, live on the radio to the whole of London. We found out later that Goldfish Man was behind everything. He had found Julie's parents, organised the phone call, and said what a nice surprise it would be for Julie if they spoke to her on the show. Well, politicians are like that, aren't they? Anyway, we told Julie's parents that we were sorry, and then had a very exciting holiday with them in Malaga. Somehow, we sold the Queen's yacht to an Arab sheikh by mistake. But that's another story. I hope you enjoyed Voby the Accidental Guru. And that is the end of Season 1 of Behind the Bottom Line. Season 2 will be back in April with more great stories including Julie and Paula, and also the background to those stories. In the meantime, why don't you catch up on any episodes you may have missed and subscribe on Spotify or podcast so that you can get Series 2 as soon as it's available. Please write reviews of this podcast and share with your friends so that other people can enjoy Behind the Bottom Line. Until April 2020, happy listening.